So we are starting our first session for NetImpact with our guest speaker, Carole Neal, and we're thrilled to have her here. Before we get into the good information that she has for us, I wanted to allow one of our participants, Chris, to introduce himself and NetImpact. If you'd like to take a minute to do that, Chris.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it, Heather, and thank you, Carole, for joining us today. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us. I'm the, interim president for the CLU's NetImpact chapter that we're working to found here, and I appreciate all of you for joining us for our first event, and I think most of you are on our mailing list, so we'll be keeping you updated as we plan future events. So thank you for joining.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris, for being here and for championing the new chapter and getting us going. And I know you have help doing that too, so we appreciate everybody pitching in there. So let's get to it. Anita, do you have a few things that you'd like to say?
Yes. First of all, congratulations, Chris, and to your team for arranging this first online conference. NetImpact is generally an on-campus student group, and we don't have a campus. You are sitting in your campuses across the country. And this will be the first student group ever for this national organization. And Chris, you should be very proud that you have been working on this and that you've taken the lead on this. And so our first speaker, we were thinking that we need to bring in someone who is going to be able to share her insights from a professional point of view, and actually, I'll have to say, from a business perspective. Because if you, in all of the readings that the students have been reading and looking at, and some of the things that you will be looking at, you'll notice that there's a lot of complaints about nonprofits not following what for-profits do as far as how you market or how you reach out to your customer or how do you organize meetings and all kinds of events. There is a big discussion online about taking some of the aspects of what's happening online and applying it in for-profits and applying it to the nonprofit world or the social, the mission-driven organizations. Well, Carole happens to work for Verizon Marketing and is responsible for managing the marketing strategy of within that business. However, she is also very much involved with the Verizon Foundation and has her own personal endeavors that she's involved with. And one of the things that she's always called upon to do is to talk about yourself. How do you brand yourself? How do you brand even your, I guess you could say starting with yourself and then branding out to your organization or company. And so we've invited Carole Neal to be our first speaker. And we will, as Heather told you, record this and then we'll post it in the on Canvas so that everyone can enjoy this, because I have spoken to Carole a couple of times and know exactly what she's going to be presenting, and it is very important information and pertinent to the things that all of you are studying now. So thank you, Carole, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Anita, and hello, everyone. I am so excited to be part of this inaugural session. And so let me just, as Anita said, I do work for Verizon. I help manage one of the branding and strategy and messaging for one of their largest products, which is a multi-billion-dollar product. And as many of you know, Verizon is one of the top brands in the world. So we do branding there. But I'm also just personally passionate and invested in helping nonprofits because, as Anita mentioned, a lot of times there's a gap between what nonprofits do and what for-profits do. And there's, I think, certainly an opportunity to drive some synergies in those. And I think that ultimately helps in the nonprofits being better positioned to receive grants and funding and increase volunteer engagement. And so, my background with nonprofits has been working with Taproot Foundation to do some consulting, working with Girl Scouts, working with Education Pioneers, and a variety of different organizations to really help them focus on their branding, their mission, their strategy, and how do you bring that all together to present a very cohesive picture to the marketplace. And so we'll talk about that today, but a lot of what we talk about in professional branding or corporate branding or mission-driven branding is also the same for you as an individual in terms of your own personal brand. So many of these things that we're going to talk about are applicable. So as we go through the session, if you have questions, we'll try to address them, but we'll also leave plenty of time at the end to go through any questions that you all may have. Okay? So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I did put together a presentation, which we will send out after the call so that you guys can have an opportunity to look at it and be familiar with what I'm talking about. So, okay. So just let me double check. Are you guys able to see that, like Anita? Okay, perfect. So it looks like everybody's able to see it. I do have my contact information on the first page. I also have it on the last page. So, if you have questions about something that I've discussed, please feel free to email me or let me know, and I will definitely try to address them as quickly as I can. So we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to talk about, what is branding? I mean, there are a variety of different ways that people think about branding, but we'll talk about specifically what is branding, why is it important, and how can nonprofits ultimately create their brand? And again, this would be applicable for you as a personal level as well, because particularly now with social media, your personal brand is very important. So branding is it's a set of marketing strategies and tactics to help distinguish you from your competitors in the eyes of your customers. So, as we talk about mission-driven organizations, you might say, well, I'm a mission-driven organization. I don't have any competitors. Essentially, you do, because there are other organizations that are performing a similar function that you do. There's also a very limited amount of funding. So if you look at the LA area, there are over 36,000 nonprofits. However, if you look at foundations and organizations in the area, there's a limited amount of funds. Like they can't say yes to everyone that asks. So part of what you're doing with branding is distinguishing yourself from other organizations that may have a similar cause, a similar function, etc. You're ultimately, setting yourself apart from the competition. So what does branding include? It's really visual and verbal messages. And you think about it, you are bombarded with branding every single day. You may not think of it as branding, but you're bombarded with it every single day. So I actually have some little props here. So one is, logo. So I'm going to show you this cup and you can see this logo. And I don't even have to say what I can buy from this company. You absolutely know what this logo means. You know that you can go get coffee from Starbucks and that you can get a dark roast, you can get a custom frappuccino, blah, blah, blah. You know exactly what this company provides without the name, just by me showing the logo. Branding could also be a slogan. So a couple years ago, Verizon had a slogan, "Can you hear me now?" Everyone knew that when they heard that was Verizon. It can also be like a shape or something like that. So for example, if I show you this bottle, you know what this is. You know that it's a bottle of Coca-Cola. And it's cool, I have my name customized on it. But you know that it's a bottle of Coca-Cola because one of the things that's distinctive about their brand is the shape of their bottle and the color scheme. So that's also something that can be part of your brand, is using a very defined set of colors, a product shape, or even a font, okay? If I was to hold up my iPhone, you guys know that this is the iPhone. It's hard to see, but in the back, you see that little Apple symbol with the bite out of it. You know that absolutely that's from Apple. Branding, people typically think of advertising, whether it's print, it's TV, it's online. And again, that's part of it, but it's also incorporating those other things that we've talked about as well. Many times in branding, there might be a pitch person. So think about Progressive Insurance and Flo. Every time you see Flo, who's a pretend character, but every time you see Flo, you think of Progressive. So that's branding. Like as soon as they show her image, you know exactly what that brand is. And then also with the, I would say the increasing importance of social media, we see a lot of branding across social media. So people are using Facebook, they're using Twitter. It's very interesting now that you see a lot of even corporate brands on Snapchat. So it's beyond just the a YouTuber or teenagers, many corporate brands, very well-respected corporate brands like Fortune, Wall Street Journal, they're on Snapchat trying to reach their different audiences. So all those things are parts of branding. So it's more than just what you may think of as a logo. Think of branding as a full set of ways to try to reach your customer, because ultimately you're trying to get them to buy. And what you want them to do is when they see your logo or your slogan or whatever it might be, you want them to come up with this slogan equals this brand equals a certain type of product or service that I know, I trust, I like, that I want to purchase. So let's talk about why branding is important. As I said before, it ultimately gets your customer to buy the product or service. And again, if you're thinking from the social entrepreneurship perspective or the nonprofit, I'm not selling a product or service. Well, you are in a way, because what you're selling or your product or service could be the services that you provide to your clients. Perhaps it's counseling, perhaps it's after school tutoring, perhaps it's meals, whatever. You are providing a service, and that needs to be part of your brand. Sometimes a brand name becomes so commonplace that it's used to describe an action or an item. So, one of my favorites is we say, can you Xerox this? Well, Xerox is a brand. You're using that brand name to take the place of the verb copy. Or people say, just Google it. Okay, well, that's actually using a brand name to refer to doing a web search. Or can you hand me a Kleenex? Kleenex is the brand name. It's actually tissue, or Scotch Tape It. Well, Scotch Tape is the brand name. So those are examples of companies that have been so effective with their brand and their brand marketing that their company name has become a part of our daily lexicon. So branding can ultimately help increase revenues. Again, if you're in the nonprofit or social entrepreneurship area, it can help increase fundraising. It improves the customer experience, because think about like when you go to Starbucks or McDonald's, basically what the menu is, what you're going to get. When I go to McDonald's, I'm going to get, I'm making this up, but a Big Mac or a quarter pounder with cheese or a 6-piece McNugget, whatever. You know what that menu is, and you know that it's essentially going to taste the same, whether you're going to a McDonald's in LA or whether you're going to a McDonald's in Michigan. That's really going to be the same. And so you rely on that. You trust that. And that's building that brand trust that keeps you going there again and again and again. So while you might be in a new town and say, I want some coffee, and here's, Joe Schmo coffee shop, but I don't know what their coffee is like and I may not like it. I know when I go to Starbucks, I'm going to get, a venti frappuccino with whatever, half whip, no foam, whatever. So it helps improve the customer experience, because customers have a very consistent expectation of what their experience will be when they get your product or service based off of what you've communicated to them as your brand. It also ultimately helps attract additional clients. So again, we talk about word of mouth. If you have, it's very interesting. If you have a positive experience, people will relate a positive experience. But I forget the exact number, but people will relate a negative experience significantly more than a positive experience. So what brands are doing, especially with social media, is they're very carefully monitoring that, because if someone goes online and said, I had a really crummy experience, at Starbucks, that starts to proliferate. And so they want to jump on it and make sure that they're able to quickly contain that situation and address whatever the customer's issue is. And a lot of times they will address it more quickly if you're going through social media than if you're going through some of the traditional channels, because they know how quickly that can spread. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about the next thing. So wanted to give you guys some examples of some nonprofit social entrepreneur brands, so that, again, as we think about it, we're not just thinking about it from a corporate perspective, but, we're also thinking about it in the nonprofit space, which, many of you guys may be working in or looking to work in. So think of the American Red Cross. I mean, that's a stellar brand. Disaster hits. I want to make a donation to help people in Katrina, people in Haiti, people in fill in the blank. That you can donate to Red Cross, that your money is going to go to those victims in need, that they have a system and a method and, feet on the street to get that money and get supplies to people. You feel very comfortable with that brand, right? Versus, let's say some nonprofit sprung up and you've never really heard of them and you don't know what's really going to happen. So that's an example of a brand that's been very, very effective. Susan G. Komen Foundation has been very effective in raising money for breast cancer awareness. And so, when you see their literature, exactly what they're about. Exactly what they're going to do. They have the breast cancer pink ribbon. So you don't even think about, I wonder what cause they're working on. Exactly what it is. Salvation Army at Christmas time, when you see the Santa and the red kettle and they're ringing that bell, exactly what they're doing, that they are collecting money for families in need. So these are examples of companies that have, nonprofit companies, but really at the end of the day, they are multi-million, even multi-billion-dollar corporations that have very effectively branded. Another one is Girl Scouts. So I'm a Girl Scout troop leader. And let me tell you, whenever I say, I'm involved with Girl Scouts, people ask me, when do you get cookies? I mean, so Girl Scouts plus cookies, you know what I mean? It's like 1 + 1 = 2. Like, they very effectively have branded Girl Scouts with cookies. So let's talk about United Way. This is an example of, we'll talk about impacting your brand and how that can affect you. But, a couple years ago, United Way has dealt with several scandals where they've had people in high-ranking positions with a misappropriation of funds. So it used to be when you worked for a major corporation and you're filling out your 401k and your benefits and all that other kind of stuff, there used to be a box that you could check that you automatically wanted to donate to United Way. And so a portion of your paycheck would go to United Way. So that was a big source of income for them, because people would check the box and they'd get the stream of income that they weren't actively, really having to put someone out to make phone calls. Will you donate? Will you do it? Will you do it? It was automatic, and people would do $25 a paycheck. So when you think about that on an annual basis, they're getting $300. And, you think about the size of corporations that they were doing, this was a very effective fundraising method for them. Well, when they had, some of the scandals in terms of misappropriation of funds, that dried up because companies weren't willing to associate with United Way because it negatively impacted their brand. So you then had a major source of funding dry up for the United Way. And they said, one of the articles I read said that for 3 years, their funding stalled because they lost that major revenue stream. Or even just think about it from a professional sports, perspective. I love football. But, you think about some of the football players that perhaps have been accused of domestic violence or drugs or, whatever it might be. And they may have had very large contracts with Nike or Under Armour, et cetera. When they get into those situations that a company like Nike perceives may be a negative impact to Nike's brand, that athlete can be very quickly dropped from the roster of athletes that Nike is promoting. And their apparel can be pulled from the shelves because it's a negative impact. So, when we think about branding, it's not only positive, it can have a negative impact if something happens with your brand and you're not able to address it. I wanted to talk a little bit about TOMS because that is, it's not a nonprofit, it's a for-profit company, but a big part of their brand is social entrepreneurship. So when you go to their page, the first thing that you can click on is how to shop. But the second thing that you can click on is how TOMS gives back. And it talks about how for every shoe you buy, they give a shoe to, someone in need. And so that has become an effective part of their brand. And I think you see more and more, for-profit companies weaving in their particular cause as part of their brand so that consumers understand it's not just about making money, but it's also about making a difference or making an impact. So when you're creating a brand strategy, what are some of the things that you should think about? And again, this is personal as well as, with the organization that you might be thinking about working with or currently working with. So you want to make sure that there is a very close alignment with the organization's mission, vision, and marketing strategy, because these things all roll up into your brand. They can't operate independently, or if they do, you then have a brand that's inconsistent with who you are as a company. So the mission, really is, that's what guides the actions, directions, and the decision-making for the company. I mean, ultimately, why does this company exist? So it might be like TOMS and Maine, we want to provide people with comfortable, I'm making this up, but we want to provide people with comfortable footwear, but we also want to make a difference and impact communities, around the world by providing shoes. Then you also look at the vision. That's really more of an internal thing, but it's the framework or roadmap that you set out as to how you are going to achieve the vision. What are some of your guiding principles? And then your marketing strategy is looking at who's your target customer? What do you perceive as your organization's strengths and weaknesses? Where are you as it relates to your competitors? And what are some of the marketing tactics that you're going to use to help achieve your objectives? So when you're thinking about a brand, let's say you're a very serious, Fortune 500 company. If your brand is a cartoon character, that doesn't match with who you are. Or let's say, you're thinking about, again, what your personal brand is. You want to think about what you are focused on, what you're passionate about. Perhaps it's STEM, perhaps, it could be a lot of different things. But if your passion is STEM, and when people go online and they looked at your LinkedIn page or they looked at what you are promoting on Twitter, and let's say that it's not professional, or perhaps it's very controversial and nowhere STEM is mentioned, like someone's not going to walk away with the feeling of, or the understanding of, oh, this is what's in alignment with this person's brand. This is who they are. And so, it's very important that all of these things work together. As you're thinking about what your brand strategy is, again, with respect to the organization, you want to think about the clients served. So, for example, let's say that your organization is, something that, I'll give an example. Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's knows their market very, very well. So the clients serve, they know people, they like to try things. They're gourmet, but they want a good price, that kind of thing. So when you look at the clients served by Trader Joe's and their tone, it's linked very closely together. So when you read a Trader Joe's frequent flyer, or I forget what their magazine is called, it's very funny, it's very witty, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, it's appealing to those people. It talks about price, but in a kind of a funny and witty way, because it's appealing to people. They know their market, and they know what they're thinking about. You also want to look at, what is the level of client engagement that you want? So are you looking to have it, what I sometimes call send, no receive, which you're just kind of talking at people. That's really not what you want as part of your brand. You want there to be a discussion. You want there to be engagement. You want people to feel like they're part of your brand, because as they do that, that increases their loyalty to you and their willingness to continue to buy products and services from you. And then lastly, you want consistency. You want what you show online. So whatever your logo is, let's say online and in print and on TV, et cetera, it should be very consistent. It shouldn't be a different logo for each thing or a different tone of voice. When you're formal, when you're serious, when you're playful. It needs to be consistent so that when people see your brand, like when I get the Trader Joe's flyer, I sometimes just look through it for fun because like their write-ups are funny, you know what I mean? And so I enjoy just reading the different write-ups. And sometimes it makes you willing to try something that you perhaps wouldn't have been able to. You're like, chicken chili lime burgers. I wouldn't have thought of that, but sounds interesting. So you want to be consistent across your brand. So when you get your Trader Joe's frequent flyer, that's very consistent with the tone that they take if you listen to one of their radio ads. It's very consistent with when you go in the store. The employees are in Hawaiian shirts, they're kind of informal. There's coffee, there's taste testing, there's witty little things written on the chalkboard. They're very, very consistent across their brand. And that's important because people start to have an expectation and they want to know that what I get is going to be met, that I can get the same thing every time I go. So let's talk about what I like to call lovingly branding blunders. Those mistakes that companies, and I mean big companies as well as small companies, may make. And it's you can't be perfect all the time, but there are some very common ones that we see. So one can be frequently changing the branding. One year your logo is one thing, the next year it's another thing, the next year it's another thing, or you change your logo and it's so dramatic, people are like, huh? So like if McDonald's was to ever change those golden arches, I mean, there would probably be like rioting in the streets because people are like, wait, what? I know what those M's stand for. Kids would be like mad, or they said, well, we're not going to give a toy in the Happy Meal anymore. Like there would be frustration because you have that expectation of that brand. Or if you have so for example, like to me, Uber recently changed their branding. So before it was a U, which made sense. I see the U, I think Uber. Now it's kind of this graphic, new agey kind of thing that, kind of flashes. And, when I looked at it, I'm like, there's nothing, when I see that, there's nothing that tells me that that's Uber. You know what I mean? Like, I don't get that right away. Now that's just me, but, just giving an example, when you change your brand, you want to make sure that it's on the mark and you want to make sure that you're not changing your branding all the time. Another branding blunder can be being out of touch with your customers. So we talked a little bit about knowing your market and knowing your customers. So again, what if Trader Joe's started being really formal and not kind of fun in their newsletters, or when you suddenly walked into, their store, everyone was dressed in khakis and a suit, or, khakis and a polo shirt, or wearing a tie and dress slacks. So, that's completely inconsistent with their brand and with their customers. So you want to make sure that you are actually spending the time to talk with your customers, understand their expectations, understand what their challenges are and how you're addressing those so that you can match the brand. Your brand can match that. So the brand voice doesn't match your target audience. I kind of just talked about that. Inconsistent branding across advertising mediums. So when I look online, I see one logo. When I look in the paper, it's a different logo. When I go to Facebook, it's a different logo. I mean, you want to be consistent across advertising mediums. Now, being inconsistent can also mean you do something where a brand does something where they tweet like crazy for, a week, and then you don't see anything else from them forever. Like the next time they tweet is like 2 months later. Like that's inconsistency in your branding. So what I say to companies and to you personally, like whatever you're going to do with social media, make sure it's something that you can be consistent with. If you're not able to tweet 5 times a week, that's fine. Can you do 2? If you can do 2, consistently do 2. Be consistent, because part of your brand is your customers are going to want to know that they can expect a certain level of consistency from you. Then, the thing that we see all the time is insensitive posts or statements. Obviously that primarily occurs in social media, where a brand has really, perhaps tweeted something that's out of line. They've tweeted something that's insensitive. They've tried to, take advantage of a situation, or people feel like they're trying to capitalize on a situation, and it rings hollow, So that's another way that a company can inadvertently impact their brand. And then, let's talk about this on a personal level as well. Again, as you guys know, what you do online lasts forever. You think it's gone, but really it's not. It's there forever. And so, if you tweet something or, post something that is, that could be controversial, et cetera, there can be some repercussions to your personal brand. So as you know, there are people who, one example was someone who, he wasn't at work. It was off hours on the weekend, but he got into an Uber. He was extremely belligerent and offensive towards the Uber driver, and he was drunk, and said a lot of things that were very controversial. That it was filmed. It was someone filmed it with their iPhone. It was posted online. Person lost their job. That kind of stuff you see happen quite frequently. So while these branding blunders, we may be talking about it as it relates to an organization, it really also, impacts you personally. And what I try to say as my personal guideline is I don't tweet, post, or put into email anything that I would not want on the front page of the LA Times, Washington Post, whatever, or that I wouldn't want my mom or grandma to see. You know what I mean? Again, another example of that is, the DNC. People were fired because of snarky remarks that they made in an email that they thought no one would see, would never be, never come to light. So when you think about branding, it is really not only professionally, but it is personally, think about that as well. Okay, so I want to make sure I'm good on time. I think I have a few more minutes, but I want to talk about some of the branding strategies for nonprofits. So my personal passion and thing that I feel is, if you do nothing else as a nonprofit, but again, this also to me is important personally, is develop a 30-second elevator pitch. So one time I was working with this nonprofit, and I asked, the question that we asked the person was, she wanted funding to do a counseling center and do all these great programs. But it was literally kind of like she was trying to boil the ocean. And so I said, well, let's say I found that donor, that's willing to write you a check for the $300,000 that you say you need. Tell me what you do and why I should give you the money. She spoke for 30 minutes. I, was struggling like that to stay awake, but it was 30 minutes. Like, your donor will have checked out a long time ago. So personally and professionally, you need an elevator pitch, and that elevator pitch needs to be short and sweet. It needs to talk about, what your organization is, what it does, and how you want that person to engage, whether it's a donation, whether it's volunteering, whatever it is. And part of your mission and vision can be wrapped up into that. So, I'm going to give a pretend example, and, I'm going to do Girl Scouts because I live it, breathe it all the time. But, if you said to me, well, what does Girl Scouts do? I'll say, Girl Scouts builds girls of, courage, confidence, and character. We are one of the biggest organizations that provides STEM, education to young girls, as well as teaching them how to run and manage their own business and make an impact in the community. I really could use your help as a volunteer, or I could really use your help in letting one of these girls shadow you for a day. Or did you know if you make a $25 donation that, that helps a young girl join a STEM program? Short, sweet, to the point. And that is just to kind of get it going when someone says, well, tell me what your organization does, or tell me a little bit about you. You need that 30-second pitch. The other thing I would say is an important strategy for a nonprofit is to reach out to their donors on a regular basis, not just when you need money. You don't want to treat them like an ATM. You really want to engage with them so that it's an ongoing conversation. One of the ways that you can do that is bringing to life the client's stories. I like to call that connecting the donor's heart to his or her wallet. People give from an emotional place. It really doesn't matter, even if it's a big foundation or whatever. Someone is giving from an emotional place, and you have to find a way to connect to that emotion. Some of the ways that I think nonprofits do that effectively is illustrating how the donation impacts the organization. So the food pantry, when it says, $25 lets us feed a family of 4 for a day, I'm in, or that one, like the Feed the Children one always gets me, because the kids are like sad and, hungry, and they're like, for $1.50 a day, you can, I'm like, well, that's a coffee, that's a Starbucks or less. Like you can, it appeals to your emotion to make a donation. One example I give is, someone that I served on the board with had a local nonprofit, ran for, he ran for, I just lost my train of thought, but he ran for the LAUSD school board. So, I was going to make like a little donation, whatever. But he sends out a very specific email that says, if you donate $36, I can buy a burner phone that lets my volunteers practically call round the clock as we head into this weekend that is so critical for my campaign and garnering support. So my donation went from $25 to $36. He got a 40% increase in my donation because he was very specific about what he was going to do with the money. So that's something that I think is very important as part of the branding strategy for nonprofits. You really need to help your donors understand how they are making an impact. Be consistent in your brand voice across all media properties. When you have that 30-second pitch, you need to share that with all the key members of your staff so that everyone is singing from the same hymnal, reading from the same book, however you want to call it. You want to make sure that everyone is very consistently saying the same thing. I don't want to ask, hey, what is Claremont Lincoln University about? And Heather tells me something totally different than Anita tells me, which is totally different than what Claire tells me. Because then I'm like, well, what do you do? So it needs to be very consistent. And then lastly, fiercely protect your brand, both personally and professionally. Once your brand is damaged, it takes a long time to recover. So look at Chipotle, which had the E. coli scare. It has taken them several quarters to recover from that. And they still haven't, gotten back to where they were. And they were on track to become one of the fastest growing, fast food chains. But now they've had a serious impact to their revenues, to the number of customers that come. I know there have been events where we've even thought about like, oh, maybe we should have Chipotle. And then we're like, maybe not, so it's impacted their brand in ways they really can't even calculate. Okay, I'm going to go through these two things real quick, and because I want to make sure we have time for questions. But as we talk about branding, again, I mentioned marketing strategy before, but that is a very important part of your brand. So brand is not simply slapping a logo, coming up with something cute to say and going, shoo, I got my brand. It is the outcome of all these other different elements that go together. So your marketing strategy, you really want to think about who is your target customer, and you want to be very specific. Don't just say, oh, I'm trying to target inner city youth. Oh, okay, that's a lot of inner city youth across the country. Now, being specific would say, I want to target inner city youth in the Claremont area that are between the ages of 12 and 17, and perhaps you want to target boys or perhaps you want to target girls, whatever it might be. But you are being very, very specific about what your target audience is, who your target customer is. And once you figure out that target customer, you want to get inside their head. You want to understand what they're thinking about, what their needs are, what their business challenges are. And don't suppose that you know that just because you've been around that community or that population or you've worked with them. Ask them, ask them what they need. Ask them what their concerns are. Ask them what a day in the life is of, them getting this service or whatever it might need, whatever you're providing. Ask that so that you better understand who your target customer really is. You want to understand your target markets. Where are these customers? Are they in LA? Are they urban? Are they rural? Are they all across the US? Are they all around the world? Where are they, and what are your means to get to them? You also want to do a SWOT analysis, so that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And, I encourage you that when you're doing this and when you're doing the competitive assessment, which looks at how do you stack up against the competition, be brutally honest. Don't just look at it through, our little rose-colored glasses of nobody else provides this service and it's so awesome. Somebody else provides the service, somebody does it better, somebody has, a better supply chain or more feet on the street to do it. Possibly. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But you really want to take a very, very hard side as you're looking like that. That's what are your strengths and weaknesses? Where do you really excel? Where do you need to cover your flank a little bit, in terms of what you bring to the table as a professional, whatever it might be. Be brutally, brutally honest. That is the best thing that you can do for yourself. If you really try to kind of gloss it over, it will come back to bite you in the end because you don't then have a really accurate picture of where you are. The value proposition. What specifically does your organization bring to the table? So if you tell me you are a healthcare provider, or let's say you're providing counseling services. Well, I could say, well, Aetna does that, Blue Cross Blue Shield does that, my local church does that, my local community center does that. Like, why are the counseling services that you provide better, different? What is it that distinguishes it? And that's really kind of what goes in your value prop. Like, how are you different? How are you addressing the customer's needs, solving a problem for them, making life easier? We talked about the elevator pitch, 30-second high-level summary, what your organization does, what challenges it address if you have a request. And again, the same applies for you personally as it does professionally as you're looking at what your elevator pitch is. Because someone might say, as you start looking for a job, hey, what are you interested in? And if you're all over the map in terms of what you want to do, it's very hard for them to help you or to, be very specific and say, oh, I know someone in that industry, or I know a position like that. Okay, the last piece I want to just touch on real quickly is messaging. That's, again, a very important part of your brand strategy because we talked about the tone and the voice, etc. Messaging is really asking yourself, who is our audience? What do they think of us? Not what do you think, but what do they think? And again, the way that you get that is asking them, what is their current perception of us? And then what do we want them to believe? Like, so Chipotle, current perception might be like, it might be kind of sketch when I go in there and get the guacamole. You know what I mean? What do we want them to believe is that we are now, we've done extensive employee training. We've made significant investments. Our food is safe. You will be completely fine if you come here and eat. And then you want to know what proof points you have to support this belief. And so when you're talking about a nonprofit or mission-driven organization, those proof points might be the number of clients that you've served. So let's say you were doing after-school tutoring. You might say something like, I'm literally going to go through like clients' awards recognition and statistics. So that might look like saying we served, an average of 50 students a week over the last 6 weeks. We noticed that, when they started, on average, these were C+ students. By the end of the 6 weeks, they were B students, and 3 of them got recognized for principal's honor roll. I completely made that up, but you can just see that you need to give specific proof points. Just because you say it's true doesn't mean it's true. You want to back it up with the facts to the extent that you can. And then you want to use all this input to develop a high-level messaging framework that really guides your brand voice. So when you're tempted to be really formal, or you got to go back and look and say, oh wait, that's not our brand voice. Our brand voice is actually kind of informal and actually almost playful. So let me rewrite this sentence from, being super technical or business oriented to be more in layman's terms that appeals to our audience. So that is the end of my piece. I have my contact information on here. So you can, email me, you can follow me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn. And then, Anita and Heather, I'll turn it back to you to address any questions that may have come up.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know there's information in there that our students probably have. So let's turn it over to them. And just as a reminder, you hover over your click on participants, you have a raise on the bottom right. Or go ahead and if you want to just jump in and ask a question. We should be okay. We don't have too many people on. Okay. It might be my computer that's doing the echo. Pass it on to the next person.
Tell me if mine is doing the echo too. I'm trying to turn it down maybe. Does this help? It helps a lot? Okay, good. So I did want to ask a question. When do you start thinking, I wanted to ask 2 questions. When do you start thinking of brand? When is it that you should really start outlining and thinking what kind of brand that you want to do? And then I wrote down something else, and I was thinking of Live Strong the entire time you were talking.
Yeah.
And that even though they made some changes, that when I had the CEO come speak in class, I wasn't impressed because of the reputation that they had received. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I would say you need to think about your brand at the beginning. Like as you are forming your organization, the brand is a critical part of who you are. So we talked about like mission and vision and marketing strategy, all those things which you should be doing at the beginning of, formulating your organization. And again, they all are under review from time to time. Like you don't keep the same mission and vision. You might need to tweak it over time, but it's literally upfront. And if you miss the boat on it, or if you don't take it seriously, sometimes it's hard to recover from that, So Live Strong is interesting. I mean, when you think about it at its height, everybody that you knew had that yellow band. Exactly. Had that yellow Live Strong band. And then there was, of course, the very serious scandal with Lance Armstrong. And, I think he was effective in kind of divorcing himself from the organization. And they were able to continue. But I think the organization was still, significantly negatively impacted by what went on with him. And it takes, I think this is what is important to understand. It takes years to rebuild consumers' trust. And same with your personal brand. If you, make a major blunder, et cetera, you have to understand it will take time to rebuild your personal brand. And so I'll give you a great example. I'm on Twitter. A lot of what I tweet is, technology related, STEM related, Girl Scouts, and I also tweet on behalf of Verizon. So I'm always very careful about what I tweet. But literally a couple of weeks ago, I get a notification that the president of the company is following me on Twitter. Ah! But I wasn't worried because I knew that I was always careful about what I tweeted. So I wasn't having to go back and go delete, 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 delete. Like, I hope he doesn't see me going, work sucks. You know what I mean? Like, you just have to be vigilant. Like your parents used to tell you, and you probably roll your eyes, you know, your reputation is important.
Any other questions from anyone or comments?
Okay, so this says, as a funder, how do you think brand plays out in the funding playing field for nonprofits? So I think it is key because I think that oftentimes nonprofits feel like, I'm a nonprofit, who could say no to, you know, money for cancer? But again, there's very limited funding. So the funders only have so I used to allocate grants. There's a limited and finite amount of funding. So if you come to me and say, please fund my project because it's really great. Nope. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see specifics. I'm going to look and see, what has your organization done to make an impact in the community? So if you're able to, through your brand, you know, perhaps there's brand awareness in the community. When I say, oh, are you aware of, you know, Anita mental health counseling services? And they go, oh yeah, they really do good work. Then that makes me more inclined as a funder to consider you. But I think sometimes nonprofits, you know, it lose sight of the fact that it really is a competition. There's a limited amount of funding. And if you're not able to show why I should donate money to you versus somebody else and how you've made an impact with the money that you've received, then I'm less likely to give you that money the next time.
I think Chris had a question.
Yeah, I actually was wondering, so when you're speaking about nonprofits, the thought I had in my mind was there's almost two audiences that you're kind of dealing with. One is branding for your donors, and then branding for your clients or beneficiaries. So how do you have any thoughts or I guess words of wisdom on how you kind of balance those both into your brand personality and your brand tone?
Yes.
And how you communicate with both of those groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talked about a little bit about marketing strategy, and we talked about messaging, right? So, and mission and vision and all those kind of things. So your mission, your vision, you know, those are set regardless of who your audience is. Where it comes into how do you talk to these different groups is that's the audience piece of it. So who is the audience that you're trying to reach? So you might want to, when you're talking to the donors, you know, it might be appropriate, depending on your donor base, to be just a tad bit more formal, a tad, you know, I mean, definitely obviously professional always, but maybe be a tad bit more formal as you're talking to your donors, as you're talking to your clients or your volunteers. You know, you might have a little bit of a different tone that you want to take with them. And by tone, I mean, you know, is it playful? Is it formal? Is it informal? You know, are you using big fat words, or is it layman's terms? So I think that really becomes into the part of, let me show this, when I talked about, oh, sorry, wait, hold on. Oh, give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen again because I wanna go back to that page when we talk about that. Okay, so hold on 1 second. Play from current slide. Okay, so let me go back a couple slides so we can talk about that. So messaging, who is your audience? You know, that's really where that comes in into play. And then also, you know, as we're talking about your target customer, your target market. So, you know, it's important to understand branding is not like a slam dunk. Like I said, you slap up a logo and you call it a day. It really is the output of a lot of work and a lot of different elements all being integrated so that you have a very consistent message. And even though you might have different audiences, you definitely want your donors and your clients to walk away with the same understanding of what your organization does and the impact it has.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So this whole strategy here is exactly the kind of strategy that entrepreneurs use in order to launch a business. They discover what the problem is or what the issue is, but beyond that, they want to know who the customer is and who the market and what their competitive assessment is and what are they providing. So it seems to me that, in fact, as you're building a business, you are always building that brand.
Yeah.
And it just goes hand in hand very, very clearly. It goes hand in hand, especially in this marketing strategy slide that you're showing.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, to give another example, let's say you were, let's say that you were, whatever, you were marketing to parents of kids, to get them to come to a summer camp or something like that. You really want to be focus on using language that's relevant to that particular audience. It doesn't need to be all formal and, come to our summer camp where your child will experience, where it's like, it's just very professional and businessy. Like, that's not your audience. It's parents with kids, and you want to make sure that they understand that it's safe and their kid will have fun and their kid will learn and, all those kinds of things. So you really want it, it all folds together. I mean, it's very difficult to separate them. And if you do, it's not that effective, in my opinion.
In that example, however, you have two markets.
Mm-hmm.
That child has got to want to go.
Yes.
And then the parent has got to want the child to go.
Exactly.
So you really do have two different positions that you have to take.
Right. And so, and that's, that again becomes your audience, and how you are talking to that audience. So perhaps the parent, you're sending a brochure and it itemizes, why it's safe and that your counselors are trained and that you provide care from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And, your kid's going to get snacks and all these great things. To the kids, you're showing them, we're going on field trips. You can do crafts. You can do painting. I mean, you're communicating different things that are appropriate for the audience. The kids, you're certainly playing up the fun aspect and meeting new friends. And the parents, you might be playing up the safety, security, and, essentially saying, trust us with your kid. Okay, I think I saw another question.
Heather, you have a question? Unmute and then just turn it down.
Okay, is that okay? I don't really have a question. I just put out there, kicks, kid tested, mother approved. I remember that from
exactly.
At the same time.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
have another question. Actually, you talked about how difficult it can be to get over some negative branding that has happened. What are some tips for, especially small organizations that might have, even if it's just a bad Yelp review or a bad couple of conversations going on about their organization? What are some practical tips to just address those? Do you face it head on? Do you just keep doing what you're doing? How do you deal with that?
So I advocate facing it head on. And let's be honest, there's some people who are going to, troll you on the internet no matter what. I mean, like, literally everything could have been perfect and they could have been like, there was an extra grain of salt on my fish. It was awful. So obviously there are those people, but I think you need to meet it head on and treat it as constructive criticism. Is there something there? So a lot of times I've seen, you gave the example of a bad Yelp review. So first and foremost, I would say jump on it and jump on it fast, because bad news travels faster than good news, unfortunately. So let's say you got a really bad Yelp review. What I've seen be effective is sometimes those, the management has reached out to the person and said, Heather, I'm sorry you had a really bad experience when you came to, our coffee shop, and whatever. They might outline the changes that we've made, or, please feel free to contact me at XYZ number so we can resolve the situation to your satisfaction. You know what I mean? Like, you want to get on top of it because you want to shut down that negative conversation. You don't want it to keep going on because it literally spreads like wildfire. And when people then Google you or Google the organization, all they're going to see is all this negative stuff popping up versus the positive stuff because the conversation is kept going. So get on it quickly and treat it as constructive criticism. That, you know, there might be some truth in it. And so, you know, try to, you know, the old saying, the customer's always right. I mean, sometimes, but, you know, go back and look at, is there some truth to this and how can we address it to help other people not have that same experience?
That makes sense. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. John, I know you have a question, and then we'll wrap it up, and thank you.
Thanks. I'm curious, a lot of the presentation is focused around organizational branding. Are there specific things that would be unique for personal branding that should be paid attention to, particular areas? And what kind of things would you kind of focus for the personal branding side of things?
Yeah. So let's talk about personal branding, and I'll talk about it a little bit from the branding blenders perspective. You know, I would say personal branding, you need to identify like who you are and how you want to market yourself, you know? So for example, I market myself as someone who is very knowledgeable about marketing. And so I'm very consistent with that across, you know, what I promote. I'm knowledgeable in marketing. I'm passionate about girls in STEM. You know, I'm passionate about technology. So if you go to my LinkedIn page, if you go to my Twitter page, you will see very consistently, if you even look at my volunteer experience, you very consistently see that thread, you know, and that I'm passionate about nonprofits. Like, so from a personal branding perspective, I think it's important to know who you are, to make sure that you reflect that personally and professionally. And so, you know, that your social media reflects that your professional, you know, your LinkedIn, whatever it might be, reflects that. And that you're doing things that are consistent with your mission, your vision. And that in a personal way might be your passion. You know what I mean? So let's say you're really passionate about motorcycle riding, you know, like someone that's looking at your social media presence or who you present yourself to be, you know, that should somehow come through. Not that it should dominate it, but that it should somehow come through. We talked about being careful about, you know, what you post. And I mean, I'll tell people quite honestly, look, if you want to rant and rave, then you need to make your Twitter account private, your Facebook account private, or you need to have two accounts, you know, one that's your rant and rave account and one that's your professional account, because people do search, they do Google, you know, and they do say, well, look, I just Googled this person and all this negative stuff came up and I don't want to really associate them with my company because they have a lot of, you know, negative baggage coming with them. So that's what I would say, you know, think about who you are as a person, what you want to communicate, what you're passionate about, and be in alignment, you know, be in alignment with that. Does that help? Okay.
Well, thank you again, Carole, for sharing all of these nuggets of wisdom and for sharing your contact information and taking the time to just have a conversation with us. I know there's a lot in here that we can apply to our own practices and our students who are doing their own capstone action projects who need to be informed about what their stakeholders need. So we really appreciate you taking the time, and we hope to follow up and continue the conversation and keep this going. So
thank you for having me. And again, I'm not a fake, like, email me, I'll email you back. I really will. So, so if you have questions, you know, feel free to reach out to me. Again, nonprofits is my passion. I love that you guys are passionate about making a difference in the world, and to whatever extent I can help facilitate that, I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.